Hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Swamp Secrets, exposing regulatory dark matter. I am your host, Andrew Langer. So glad you can join us today. I know it's been a bit since we've done one of these. We did a couple of things at CPAC this year, which is a great event. We got a lot to catch up on. I want to talk specifically about one particular issue, and then I want to say some words about the passing of a great in our movement. But let's start with recent news, which is the announcement last week that the Federal Communications Commission is going to once again go down the road of trying to find some semblance of what's called net neutrality. And I know when I say net neutrality, your eyes glaze over, it flies over your head. You're like, haven't we been down this road before? I thought we had dealt with this, Andrew. And what is it anyway? And here's the interesting thing. It has changed somewhat. So when it was the Obama era net neutrality and the Obama era FCC, it was all about trying to treat information, little individual pieces of information equally, or at least that's what they said as it went over the web. It was really about rate paying and getting set fees and making it so that major internet service providers couldn't actually make any money over broadband deployment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But they couched it in this language of treating information freely. Whereas we all know, deep down inside, the left doesn't want information to be treated freely. Now, with this latest version of net neutrality, they're unabashed about this. There's no illusions that they care about content neutrality. They're just calling it net neutrality because, as someone pointed out to me this morning, it's like being pro-puppy. How can you be against net neutrality? But, you know, so that's what it's about. And what happened during the Obama era is that it created this stagnation in the deployment of broadband, i.e., when they go out and they build out broadband capacity, why would any internet service provider, internet company, et cetera, why would they go out and build out capacity? Why would they innovate to produce ever-increasing download and upload speeds if they can't recoup their investment, if the government's going to come in and essentially regulate how much they can charge for these things? And this is something that we said was going to happen, and in point of fact, it did happen. But then we got the Trump administration. It came in. We had a court that said, well, you can't go and do this way. And so between what the court said and FCC Chairman Ajit Pai saying, issuing what's called the Open Internet Order, we had this grand renaissance. I know it's pronounced renaissance. I'm going to say renaissance because I'm going to make myself sound much, much more intellectual. And we had this massive increase in broadband deployment. That means building out broadband, whether it's fiber optic or whether it's what they call coaxial cable, your traditional cable. We had a lot of folks go out there and finally start investing once again in serving, broadband to the public. And at the same time, ever-increasing internet speeds. And I dare say that had it not been for that open internet order, when the left decided to totally shut down the United States in 2020 and make us all work from home and make all of our kids do their schoolwork from home for far too long, we would not have been able to meet that demand as a nation had it not been for the open internet order under Ajit Pai's FCC. And so, one wonders, and it's funny because, and you've heard this, I'm not the only person who said this, but the left were raising a massive hue and cry when that open internet order was issued. They said it's the end of the internet as we know it. And of course that wasn't the case. What was the case is that the without the net neutrality rules either way, because we know the Biden administration doesn't care about what's actually on the books in terms of the law. If the law doesn't go their way, they'll flaunt it, i.e. what they're doing with student loan repayments, right? They are still going to intersperse themselves in between the users of the internet and folks who might see their stuff if they do not like their content. I'm going to get into a specific example of this, not about the administration, but about social media platforms. So now comes this Biden-era rule or proposal that has come out of the FCC. Why now, you might be asking? The now is really straightforward. So regardless of what happens in November, there's a limited window of time for the Biden administration to get things like this done. And I think they're operating under the assumption that they're going to lose in November. I don't know what's going to happen in November. That's not my, I do forecasting, but that's not what the purpose of this, podcast is all about. The point is, they are working under the assumption that they're going to lose in November. That means that whatever they want to get done ideologically, they have to do between now and next January. So we are going to see, and we have in fact seen, the gas pedal being hit on all kinds of regulatory issues. I had a conversation last night with somebody about a move to go down the road and expand an OSHA regulatory proposal on ergonomics. You'll be hearing about that from us here at the Center for Regulatory Freedom at the CPAC Foundation quite a bit. So that's why they're doing this now, and they're adding to it. So they, doing it under some obscure 1930s era telecommunications law, and there's going to be all kinds of challenges to that, but they've added something to the proposal that they had. This is a very different net neutrality proposal than it was under the Obama administration. And what's different about it? Well, now the left is unabashed about not caring about content neutrality online, right? The Biden administration leading up to the election 2024, they're all about combating misinformation online or disinformation online. And so in the name of supposed national security. So there is a huge national security component to this new net neutrality proposal that has come out of the FCC. And that is incredibly disturbing about this. And it's disturbing. Listen, we have every indication, every reason to think that if this is challenged, and it's going to be challenged in court, Congress is going to look at it, etc., that it'll be overturned in the same way that it was overturned before. But the problem, of course, is that takes time, it takes resources, it takes, frankly, the right set of cosmic tumblers coming into place, because, God forbid, we wind up challenging it and losing, which is always a possibility. You never know. But we all know that it takes years for a case, a challenge, right? A regulation goes into effect, it gets challenged in court, it takes years for it to ultimately get to the United States Supreme Court. And then, of course, we have to run the gamble as to whether or not they're going to find our way. Obviously, this gets complicated because of things like the Loper cases on deference that I don't need to get into right now. The point is, it is hugely problematic. And let me add something to this, to talk to you, to add as to just how problematic this is and why we should be deeply, deeply concerned about it. So it was made clear yesterday. A pair of stories came out, one from FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr himself, and then from a tech publication, that apparently Meta, the parent company of Facebook, in the day before this proposal was released, representatives from Meta met with aides to all 5 members of the FCC. To lobby in favor of this, by the way. Let me be really clear about this. It would be weird if I was bringing this up for the other way, right? Facebook wants stringent net neutrality rules. That should be a wake-up call to everybody, that they're the ones putting their thumb on the scale for this. And as Brendan Carr pointed out yesterday, the day after Facebook was in lobbying the FCC, and right, it's their right to do so. It's their right to lobby for these positions. We have a right to know about it when they're doing it. The day after, a local Kansas newspaper was online talking about what they were doing, and guess what? Facebook blocked their ability to release content. That's the view of the world. Listen, I've said it before. I mean, there are all kinds of ways to deal with this particular situation in terms of getting at the ability of social media platforms to moderate content online. And yes, I get nervous when we talk about big government proposals to solve these things, because I'm of the belief that anytime we hand government power, by the way, I don't think I've ever digressed into this before. One of the things you'll get to know about me, I am someone who's not a big fan of talking about what government does in terms of the rights of government. Even when we were talking about the executive branch's rights to march in and seize patents. I don't like to call it rights, though that's the way it's worded in the statute. Government, if there's anything you come away with from any of the podcasts that I do, any of the writings that I do, it's this concept. Government doesn't have rights. Government has powers. People have rights. And what happens is we give up some measure of our rights to the government in the form of those powers. We retain everything that is not surrendered to government. And so when we talk about government having rights, it essentially it evinces, it assumes, it presumes that government has these rights that are somehow inherent within it, and I don't like that. I believe that we have a government of very carefully defined powers. Anyway, so this is where things stand with this issue. On the issue of tech. So I don't like handing government additional powers because invariably those powers get turned against us, right? We now live in the very Kafkaesque world in which those folks who are patriotic and believe in America are being treated as though we are anti-American by the left and by those within the power structure. And the more power we give them to use that, the more of that power can be turned against us. So net neutrality, we are filing comments on this and a handful of other things with the FCC. And we are going to be giving you the opportunity to comment as well. So stay tuned to what we're doing at the Center for Regulatory Freedom, CPAC.org. You go and you just find us on regulatory freedom. And I just wrote a piece for the CPAC blog, digital.cpac.org. Go and find that out, a survey of these things. Now, before I go, I wanna do a tip of the hat to a good friend and a mentor, maybe too strong a word, but a colleague of mine who passed away this week. I got my start really on the activist side of things, working on property rights issues. They're very near and dear to my heart. I worked for a group called Defenders of Property Rights for a number of years when I was doing this work at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. Still very near and dear to my heart. I still talk a great deal about private property rights. In the property rights movement in America was a man named R.J. Smith. And R.J. Smith was at CEI. He was the founder of their Center for Private Conservation, ran that for many, many years. And I considered him the intellectual dean of the private property rights movement. He was a man who understood the philosophy and why property rights were important, and more to the point, could articulate how those principles could be used to advance the cause of environmental preservation and conservation, etc. That's the Center for Private Conservation. The idea that if there's an ownership stake in whether it's land and the natural resources on that land or in animals themselves, whether endangered or not, those free market principles, those pro-private property rights principles could be used to not just conserve, but propagate endangered species. Now, RJ was very disappointed when I left CEI and went over and started working for the National Federation of Independent Business. He used to introduce me at various points in time to, hey, this is Andy Langer. He used to care about private property rights. And I know he didn't mean it to be mean. He was making a joke about it. RJ knew, at least I hope he knew, that I cared deeply about property rights then. I care deeply about private property rights now. And I am honored and grateful and thankful for every lesson that R.J. Smith taught me. I'm getting a little teary here. R.J. Smith taught me and the legacy that he leaves behind. So safe home, R.J. Smith. The property rights movement is dimmer today without you in it. So that brings us to the close of yet another episode of Swamp Secrets, exposing regulatory dark matter. Please come and check us out, cpac.org. Just look for the Center for Regulatory Freedom. You can find the work that I'm doing at Andrew_Langer on the Twitter machine. I'm Andrew Langer. Have a great day, everybody.